Chapter 8, Stratification and Social Mobility in the U.S. In this chapter, we are going to discuss systems of stratification, the sociological perspectives on stratification, stratification by social class, income and wealth, poverty, life chances, and social mobility. Systems of stratification. Social inequality is a situation in which members of society have different amounts of wealth, prestige, or power. Stratification is where entire groups of people are ranked, and this perpetuates unequal economic rewards and power in society. So income are things like salary, wages, interest, stock dividends, and rental income. Wealth is an inclusive term encompassing all the person's material assets, including their homes, which is the main reason how Americans are able to acquire wealth is through home ownership. On this figure, it compares the median household income of the various states. So we see with Kentucky, it's between $40,000 and $43,000. And then the bottom map looks at people below poverty level. And so it just increases with those that are the yellow color. Those with blue have the least, like Wyoming and Utah and Virginia. The highest income earners on the higher map are, as far as average household, would be Washington, Alaska, New Jersey, Massachusetts. There are 4 general systems of stratification. That would be slavery, caste, estates, and social classes. And as mentioned in previous chapters, we have ascribed status, and that's a position assigned to a person by society without regard to their talents. So you could be born into an ascribed status. Achieved status is a social position that a person attains, so they work for it. Slavery is an institution where individuals are owned by other people who treat them as property. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights prohibits slavery of all forms, and this is for all of Earth. However, we do know that slavery still exists. Now, slavery is different than chattel slavery. So chattel slavery dealt with the transatlantic slave trade. Slavery is what we have currently. And that's where we have sex trafficking or people working in sweatshops. There were people this past week, there were, I believe, 40 Chinese people were found in a truck in Europe, and they were all dead. So now the truck driver has been charged with manslaughter. This table talks about human trafficking, and as far as those that follow the Declaration of Human Rights, full compliance will be the Tier 1. And then we have significant effort, and that will be Tier 2, so they're trying. And then Tier 2 watch list has some effort, but trafficking is a huge concern still, and so that is Tier 2 watch list. And then Tier 3 are non-compliant, no effort. They don't do anything to prevent human trafficking in those countries. Castes are comprised of hereditary ranks that are usually religiously dictated and tend to be fixed and immobile. So there's nothing you can do to enter or leave a caste, and those are rankings in society that people are born into. Countries like India subscribe to castes. Estates or feudalism. So this is not contemporary, but this is from the past. So the peasants would work the land that was leased to them in exchange for military protection and other services, such as food and a place to sleep and security. And the rich, which would be the bourgeoisie, they would be in charge of all this. So they would continuously be accruing income while those peasants had to continuously work and not make that much money off of the system. Social classes. So we have a class system, which is basically a system of classes that is ranked based on economic position. So that would be how much wealth a family has and their achieved characteristics. So that could be like if someone is a celebrity, but maybe they lost their money, so they would still have influence as far as social mobility, even if their economic position wasn't fruitful at the moment. So this can depend on the family and then what people are born into, and that would determine their current class system. However, you can move up and down within the class system in the U.S. And Rosides uses a 5-class model to describe the U.S. class system, which are going to be within the next couple slides. So we have the upper and lower classes, and that's the top 1 to 2% of the U.S. The lower class comprises about 20 to 25% of the people. So the top upper class owns more than half of the U.S., and then also they own like 80% of the world. The middle class, so there's upper middle class and lower middle class. And the upper middle class is about 10 and 15%, while the lower middle class is 30 to 35%. So the upper class has a lot of money and power, and the lower class are people that lack income and are politically weak. As far as the upper middle class, that includes professionals, doctors, lawyers, and then the lower middle class includes less affluent professionals, and that would be like professors. The working class has a huge chunk of the population, that's about 40 to 45%, and they are people that work in factories, they have blue-collar jobs, manual labor. So some may have income above those of the lower middle class, but identify as manual workers, just depending where they work. If they're a factory worker, but they still might be pulling in a ton of money. So sometimes they might be the working class that's also part of the middle class, or it can be working class that's part of the lower class. And this portion of society is decreasing. Class warfare happens, so that's where those that are in the lower class portion of society fight with those that are the upper class, the top 1 to 3%. The top 1 to 3% find it very important to have the middle class, so therefore the poor won't come after them. The poor will fight amongst the middle class. So it's just another way of keeping people stratified and placed into these classes in society. The gap between the rich and everyone else, or actually the wealthy and everyone else, is continuing to increase. The middle class is continuing to shrink, and we're actually making less money now compared to what we made in the 70s. So a lot of things started to change around there. But the income gaps and all that were closing between the 40s and 60s, and that's due to civil rights laws being passed and the New Deal programs as far as securing food, sanitation, Medicaid, Medicare, healthcare for more people in society. And now things are actually not starting, but they are continuing to get worse. Karl Marx believed that social relations depended on who controls the primary mode of production. The primary mode of production would be controlled by the bourgeoisie. So they are the capitalist class, they're the owners of the means of production, so they're the ones who own the companies. They're the ones who generate wealth without actually having to continuously work. And capitalism is an economic system in which means of production held largely in private hands, and main incentive for economic activity is accumulation of profits. According to Karl Marx, the proletariat was the working class, and the working class people end up succumbing to the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, since the bourgeoisie is always in control. So in order for the proletariat to overcome and increase the amount of wealth they accumulate, they need to develop class consciousness. And that's the awareness of common vested interests and the need for collective political action to bring about change. So in order for the proletariat to move up and to make things more fair for them, they need to be conscious of their current position and then conscious that they must work together and band together to change things. Then there is also a false consciousness. It's an attitude held by members of class that does not accurately reflect their objective position. So that would be people that vote against their means. Max Weber's view of stratification. So Weber believed in class, status group, and power. He also didn't believe that a single characteristic totally defined a person's position. So class has to do with wealth and income. Status has to do with prestige or lifestyle. And then power is the ability to exercise one's will over others. The objective method assigns individuals to classes on the basis of criteria such as occupation, education, income, and where they live. So there's prestige, and that's the respect and admiration an occupation could hold in society. So if you think of someone that's a physician, that position takes a lot of prestige. Esteem is the reputation a specific person has earned within an occupation. So it might be like the best of the best in that certain field of work. According to the text and from 2015, these are the prestige rankings of occupation, and they have a score from 0 to 100. Gender and occupational prestige. So past studies tend to neglect the occupation that women would usually take. So a new approach focuses on individual rather than the family or household. So instead of looking at family income, we can put more of a monetary value on the work that women do when it comes to being at home. Sometimes a woman could be a therapist to the family members. She could be the cook. She could be the cleaner. She could be a medic. And so according to the UN, that would carry an $11 trillion price tag. Socioeconomic status is a measure of social class based on income, education, and occupation. So the socioeconomic status is where someone is ranked in society. Income and wealth. So income and wealth is distributed unevenly in the U.S. Redistribution is not always to benefit the poor or the middle class. A lot of the times when these laws are passed, it's for tax incentives for the wealthy, and that way they're able to own more. There's more capitalism that happens. So if you remember, the bourgeoisie are the ones that own everything and the ones that control the mode of production. So those are the ones that accumulate the most wealth. So the wealth of the top 3% exceeds the collective wealth of everyone at the bottom. White households have about 10 times the median wealth of Latino households and 13 times that of blacks. And a lot of that is due to redlining, unfair policies when it comes to work and employment, racism, just things like that. Not the same benefits when it comes to the GI Bill in the past. Negative distribution of wealth that's unequal. Educational issues when it comes to racism. So there's a lot of things that play a factor into keeping things uneven. Figure 8-2 gives you an idea of the wealth distribution in the U.S. This figure also demonstrates the distribution of family wealth in the U.S. Remember that family wealth is usually accumulated by housing, and unfair housing practices has made it to where some people don't have the same access as others do. Poverty. There's about 15% of people in the U.S. that live below the poverty line. and they are sometimes called the underclass or the indigent. So one contributor is large number of workers employed at minimum wage. So it would help in some ways if minimum wage were to increase. Everything else has increased since the 70s, but wage has not increased that much. So in figure 8-4, it shows that the value of the minimum wage has decreased since 1968. Studying poverty. So there's absolute poverty, and that would be like the indigent, and they live about 400% below the poverty level, or you could think of someone that's also homeless. So no one should be living at that level of poverty. And then we have relative poverty, and those are people that don't have as much money compared to others in society. So who are the poor? The poor are people that usually do hold jobs outside of the home, but they just don't make enough money to make ends meet, depending on where they live, depending on which jobs are available, depending on their level of education. So 12% of poor adults aged between 18 and 64 work outside the home, compared to 53% of all adults. And 37% of the poor who work are employed full-time. So this shows that the minimum wage is not equitable to live off of. Table 8-4 demonstrates who the poor are in the U.S. as far as 2015. The feminization of poverty. So since World War II, there has been an increase in female poverty, and that's where females are taking the lead in households. The underclass. Those are people who are considered long-term poor who lack training and skills. They have limited educational opportunities, greater exposure to crime and health risks, reduced access to private investment, and they pay higher prices for goods and services compared to middle class and upper class areas. An explanation of poverty by Gans. So poverty and the poor satisfy positive functions for many non-poor groups. So basically those that are in poverty work for everyone else. So they perform the dirty work of society, and they have low wages. It upholds conventional social norms and values. So that way, as far as social norms, it seems that we are used to a hierarchical system, and it wasn't always that way in this land, but that's how it is now, and it's been that way for some centuries. It guarantees a higher status for those that are more affluent versus those that are in poverty. And then the poor absorb costs of social change. So when taxes change as far as how much people are being taxed, it affects the poor a lot. When new policies are developed as far as economics, it affects the poor more. So the poor can absorb things in a good way and in a negative way, but they don't have the power to affect too much change. So Weber saw class related to people's life chances. And life chances are basically the opportunities that people are able to provide for themselves with material goods, positive living conditions, and favorable life experiences. And this also plays a huge role in health status and socioeconomic status. So wealth status and power provide additional ways of coping with problems and disappointments. So as far as life chances, if someone is poor and they're really stressed out, they could turn to alcohol. Whereas if someone was wealthy and turned to alcohol, they have more opportunities for counseling, for therapy, for rehab, without it affecting everything else in their lives. Like maybe they won't lose their home due to their addiction versus somebody that's poor. Social mobility, so that's moving up or down in the society's stratification system. So that would be moving up a social class or decreasing in social class. So in the US, we have more of an open system where people are sometimes able to achieve status and move up as far as socioeconomic status is concerned. However, there are closed systems, and that's where people are unable to move their positions no matter what they do, and that is a system of slavery and with caste systems. According to research, a lot of people don't really change their mobility from their parents' social mobility, social economic status. They might be equivalent or maybe one step higher, but not too many people exceed that. According to statistics, it doesn't mean it's not possible because it definitely is. So we have horizontal mobility, and that's movement within the same range of prestige. So that could be maybe like switching careers, but still making the same type of money. We have vertical mobility, that's movement from one position to another of a different rank. So that's moving up the ladder. Intergenerational mobility, so changes in children's position relative to their parents. So maybe the parents work really hard, like maybe they came over here as immigrants and now the children are citizens and they're able to have a lot of the same opportunities as Americans do. And there's intragenerational mobility, and that's the social position changes within a person's adult life. So maybe like right now you're going to school to probably, at least for most of you, increase your socioeconomic status. So as I mentioned before, according to some research, adult children usually don't leave their parents' income bracket. However, it does happen in some cases. Occupational mobility. So it has been common among males and is a great deal of mobility, but it could be minor. So if you think about, like, per se, you're going to school to become a nurse, depending on your current job or your current position, that might give you a huge income increase. So that will be occupational mobility. So the impact of education. So it plays a critical role, especially in intergenerational mobility, because even sadly we have so much student debt, but even if you do have that debt, you're still able to give your children more of a positive outlook and more educational attainment just from your career. But the impact has diminished in the past decade, and that's showing that maybe trade schools are a great route for people to take instead of going to four-year institutions, because with four-year institutions you develop a lot of debt, but you might not make money that's comparable to all of that debt. Whereas with the trade school, you spend less time in school, less time accumulating debt, and you might have skills that a lot of people don't have. You might even be able to work for yourself and control your income more. Impact of race and ethnicity. So African Americans are less likely to see children attain good jobs and more likely to be supported by adult children. So there's a downward mobility, which is significantly higher. So if you're part of the sandwich generation where you take care of your kids and take care of your parents, that takes more income out of your pocket as far as wealth goes. And because of institutionalized racism and laws that are still around today, African Americans are less likely to improve their economic standing. And the median wealth of white non-Hispanic households is 8 times that of Hispanic households. So there's a lot of generational wealth. Even if some white people are living in poverty, they still might have access to getting loans at a better rate than others. However, sometimes white people that are going in for these situations are not aware that that's happening to other people, but I will let you know that it is still currently happening. Through banking and through institutions, it's not just something that people are automatically taking advantage of. Social mobility and gender. So women are more likely to leave the labor force if the job skills exceed offered jobs. Also, women are more likely to leave the labor force if they are focusing on family or starting a family. Clerical occupations open to women offer modest salaries and little advancement. Women find it harder to secure financing for new business ventures as far as loans go, because women are less likely to receive loans than men. And women are unlikely to move into their father's positions. It just depends on the company. It depends on how the family views women. But right now, things are not equitable. We do have a closing gap when it comes to income and wage, but it hasn't closed yet.